Not one, not two, not three, but we've got 4 new 2025 commits to the Gophers football team and counting before the official visit hits. We're diving in on those today.
Hey,
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota
Whatever
Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
What is up, Gophers fans? You are listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, typically Monday through Fridays. But this offseason, we are doing a little bit of a tweaked format. We're doing 3 shows every week, and this is the second show of this week. We'll definitely have another one for you tomorrow. But today we're going to talk about Minnesota snagging 4 more commitments to the 2025 class. And that's before this weekend's first official visit even hit. So there could be more names on the way. We're going to dive into who I am looking forward to on this official visit tomorrow and names that I'm really hopeful could come this way. But today we're going to talk about the 4 that committed after Minnesota's June 5th camp. A couple offers went out. 4 people immediately committed. So we're going to talk about each and every one of them today. And then we're going to dive into Emmanuel Karmo, the number 1 kid in the state of Minnesota for the class of 2025. He is locked in as a Gopher. Now, we knew this. We talked about this on the show, but he had been talking about going to officially visit at a couple other schools. That's locked down. He is staying in Minnesota. He is not taking those visits. We're going to dive into all those thoughts today, and then we're going to wrap it up with Gophers women's basketball talk because their team is taking shape for the 2024-25 season, and we're going to talk about what we think that rotation could be, the new transfer players and the players who transferred out. So be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube so you don't miss any of this daily Gophers content or the off-season content moving forward. And on top of that, be sure to follow wherever you get the podcast at Locked On Golden Gophers. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Pods, iTunes, you name it. If you podcast and you don't see it, let me know over on Twitter. I'll get that handled. I've had a couple people tell me when all of a sudden it isn't showing up on their podcast feeds anymore. We'll make sure it gets back. But let's dive in. So Minnesota snagged 4 commitments and counting before the official visit hits this weekend. Things to remember as we get more commits and get to these official visits. Number 1, a commitment is nice, but it doesn't really mean much until you put pen to paper and getting a national letter of intent or an NLI signed. And that happens later in the fall. So yes, we have the hopes of it all, but you never fully know in this new transfer era and this new NIL era of what will actually take place. So be excited, cheer them on, show the love, but don't get too attached. Now, number 2, many of the recent commits that I am about to mention haven't had many power conference offers. Now, Minnesota is typically known to be there early for a lot of folks in their recruitment process, and that can play to Minnesota's benefit by creating great relationships, creating great bonds with these guys that then outweighs some of the late offers that come through. But it also can mean decommitments as other offers come in. And then finally, number 3, one reason why we see those type of decommitments, in my opinion, is because kids get so excited by their first power conference offer, by their first FBS offer or things like that, that they want to jump at it right away and they commit. And then as those others start to trickle in, because usually once you have one FBS offer, once you have one power conference offer, there are bound to be maybe 2 or 3 at minimum that come along as well, because, you know, in this college football space, it's hard to keep hidden gems in the recruitment process. So one reason that people are so eager to jump at the commitments is because they see it as their first big one after maybe receiving some FCSs or some lower G5 type stuff. And then when those big ones come in, all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I'm committed. Let's go. Let's lock in. But then when other big ones start to trickle in, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I jumped the gun. So that's why you start to see some of that. I like to think of it as the new shiny toy syndrome. And hopefully we don't feel too much of that this offseason, but it is something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about those new Gophers I had mentioned. There's 4 of them that all committed within the last 24 hours. Grant Washington being the first one, a running back commit. He was initially committed to Central Michigan University. He's from the state of Ohio, but he flipped his commitment. He is coming to Minnesota as of right now. Now, he had offers from Eastern Michigan, Kent State, Navy, Central Michigan, and Arkansas State, to name a few, but this was his only power conference offer. Now, he impressed Minnesota in their camp on June 5th. He was he stood out amongst a bunch, one of the skilled position players that really wowed at that camp, along with 2026 offensive lineman, not a skilled position, but commit in Andrew Trout, who definitely put on, he impressed many out there, and happy to have him on board already so early. But I would be curious to see if Grant Washington stays committed if he has a big senior year. And as other Power 5 schools start to come, or Power Conference schools start to come calling. Now, he's a 5'10", 200-pound running back. Curious to see if he has a big jump in his senior year, and if those other offers coming, often once, like I said, a Power 5 or a Power Conference school offers, others shortly follow. Now, right now, I see him more as definitely a depth running back piece, especially in next season. Now, running backs can typically play early, but you still have Darius Taylor back next year. Hopefully, all things considered. Jordan Newman back next year. C.A. Bangura back next year. They should all be back in tow if everything plays out, if we can keep them locked in with NIL and what have you. But long term, he could be a guy that could be very interesting. Outside of those three, they probably don't have too much that they stick around for after 2025. Maybe you get one of them that sticks around in 2026, but I could see Darius Taylor going pro. I could see C.A. Bangura finishing up his eligibility, and I'm not exactly sure where Nubin's at in his eligibility. So you have J.J. Wright and Fame Ijaboy both coming from this class of 2024, both likely going to redshirt in their true freshman seasons. So they'll have 4 years of eligibility left. Grant Washington would be coming in with 4 years of eligibility. And we'll see what happens from there. So long term, he could put his name into the conversation, but an immediate impact, I don't see it too much in the year of 2025. Now, he is from Ohio, where one of Minnesota's top priority recruits, Micah Rice, a safety, is from. I saw him show some love as Grant Washington committed. Micah Rice dropped the exclamation points emoji, super excited for him. And we are in Micah Rice's top 3. So it's definitely something that could be intriguing to have another guy that you're familiar with from your home state and both locked in, hopefully building this class up. Now, the next commit is Rhett Halvaka. I could definitely have said that wrong. He's a linebacker from Wisconsin. He has other offers from Illinois State, Memphis, Ohio, and Northern Illinois. Now, it's always fun to steal some guys from our neighbor in Wisconsin. Definitely stealing one from there is always, always, always appreciated. Hopefully we can get a couple more, but it's still fairly early and fairly light in his recruiting from what I can see. Now, I will be interested if more Power Conference offers start to trickle in now for him. He has nice size, 6'4", 235 pounds heading into his senior year. Now, last season, he was productive as all get out. 110 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. That's great production from a linebacker, and I'm really intrigued by Rhett and curious to see how the senior year goes for him. Now, the next commit was Ethan Stendel, athlete from Caledonia, Minnesota. Now, he is listed as a quarterback, plays quarterback in high school, 3-sport athlete, but I don't think quarterback is what the Gophers have offered him for. It's hard to see him as an offer as a quarterback when Minnesota has already offered and committed quarterback from this 2025 class in Jackson Colick from California. He is currently Minnesota's highest commit in this class right now, and I really think that he is definitely their kind of forefront one quarterback guy. They usually only take one quarterback in each class, so that makes me wonder where Ethan Stendel will be seen on this Gophers roster if he does indeed stick with his commitment here. Now, he's 6'2", 200 pounds, so again, on the smaller size for a quarterback, I don't think quarterback will be the position for him. So I'm curious to see what Minnesota sees him as. Is it a linebacker? Is it something on the offensive side? How he's an athlete for sure. He plays football. He does track. I'm not sure what the winter sport is. Maybe basketball, maybe wrestling, something in there. But overall, definitely an athlete. I'm curious to see where they see him, but also if he sticks it out, because if playing quarterback is the priority, I would not be surprised to see him change his commitment. Now, other schools that have offered him include North Dakota and University of Northern Iowa. So we'll see what happens there, but he has officially committed from Caledonia, Minnesota to the hometown school of the University of Minnesota. Now, the final one we're going to talk about, Colin Hansen, defensive end from Byron, Minnesota, offers from North Dakota State, Northern Illinois, Ohio, South Dakota, and Washington State. Although they're not really seen as a power conference school anymore, they do have an offer out to him. Now, he has had contact with Kansas and Kansas State. No offers quite yet, but you can see the potential and the intangibles with them. 6'5", 230 pounds, good instinct when you watch his film. And on top of that, he's got great reach to finish plays. So he has good size. He has the intangibles. He could be a quality player in the right system, but it's going to take development. He's not a player that's going to be able to contribute right away. It could take 2-3 years down the line until you're able to see him in that capacity, but he has the raw talent. He has the size, and I'm very intrigued to see how that all plays out if he sticks with Minnesota. So those are the 4 commitments so far. I'm sure we'll get more over the weekend, and we will talk about them next week here at Locked On Golden Gophers. But I do want to talk about another 2025 commit in Emmanuel Karmo, who has been locked in, but he even doubled down and locked in further. We're going to talk about what that means coming up next. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at Gametime, because it is the place to be. It's the best ticketing app, in my opinion. And you know what? If Minnesota was playing in the finals with Boston, I absolutely would have used Gametime to secure my tickets to go watch the finals of my favorite squad, the Celtics. Now, I know it might cut deep a little bit to hear that, and you might judge me for wearing a Celtics jersey on this podcast. You can't really tell that's what it is. I've got it blocked off with the crop of this show, but I'm always going to ride deep with my green, and so I'm ready to tap in with game 1 of the finals tonight. And Gametime makes it so easy to get tickets for the NBA finals. It makes the process faster and easier. All the prices on the Gametime app actually go down closer to the tip-off, so definitely keep it in mind as we get towards next season, or if you're going to a baseball game, or if you're going to get into the Stanley Cup Finals. If you need tickets to any type of sporting event, or on top of that, comedy shows, concerts, or anything, what have you, Gametime is the place to be. You can pick basically any event that you want to go to, and you can find last minute deals and save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Now, on top of that, my favorite thing is the all-in pricing, because you can toggle this feature and you will see your total up front, so no surprise fees once you get to the checkout. And on top of that, you got the panoramic view where you can see a preview of your seat before you actually buy the ticket. And on top of that, they've got the lowest price guarantee and Gametime ticket coverage, so your ticket is covered, or your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download Gametime today and take advantage. Create an account and use promo code Locked On College. That's LOCKEDON College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app today, Gametime, and use promo code Locked On College. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Gophers fans, we are diving in on Emmanuel Karmo because he's locked into Minnesota even further than he was before. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, initially he had committed to Minnesota, top kid in the state of Minnesota. Everyone was excited. Then all of a sudden something came out and he said he was initially going to be visiting other schools even though he was committed. He was going to look at Wisconsin on May 31st. He was going to look at his official visit tomorrow, June 7th with Minnesota, Ohio State on June 14th, and Nebraska with June 21st. Now, that's a whole lot of Big Ten schools and a whole lot of worry for some Gophers fans, but worry no more as he has shut it down. Yes, they were all Big Ten schools. Yes, there was a rival in there with Wisconsin. And yes, Ohio State is one of the top schools in the conference, but initially, I wasn't worried about it all because this isn't new. We've seen Minnesota fend off major schools for Darius Taylor all the way to signing day. We've seen Minnesota fend off major schools with Coy Parrish all the way to signing day. And we've seen Minnesota fend off major offers from Rashad Bateman all the way up to signing day. So once again, I wasn't freaking out about this. I just kept supporting the kid, kept showing love on social media, and that's what you should do too, whether it's Emmanuel Karmo or whether it's a future commit that ends up committing but looking elsewhere. because it's just something to keep calm about. Hopefully Minnesota can fend them off, but also you would rather those kids go out and get the official visit and have no regrets than always wonder in the back of their head, am I making the right decision? And then they transfer a year or two down the line because they weren't sure. So you'd rather have them feel 100% confident in their decision. So regardless, you should support these kids. But another unique factor to Emmanuel Karmo, and that I thought could play a huge benefit to Minnesota, was actually Jackson Howard for two different reasons. One, they played together in high school. Karmo actually recruited Howard to come back to Minnesota via the portal, and their connection is a good one. But on top of that, Howard went out to another major program. He went out to LSU, and he can give direct insight into the grass isn't always greener. And that in Jackson will have the whole year to talk about Minnesota and if the program is actually what they had said or what the coaches had promised, or if it was all talk. So Minnesota had the inside track no matter what, which would have been a benefit to us with Emmanuel Karmo. Now, I understand the worry had some shaken across the fan base because he is the number one kid in the state and you don't want to take any risks. But many had asked, why commit if you are still looking? But the truth is, today's college space is different. It's vastly different. So if this is what it takes to feel 1,000% locked in, then let it happen. Ultimately, though, he took the worry away from all the Gophers fans and he committed to shut down all of his visits, stick with Minnesota, and he told 247 Sports that what made him not want to take those other official visits was seeing the coaches again face to face and feeling confident with his relationships there. He was extremely excited to visit Nebraska, but he figured, why go there if they offer the same thing, but the only thing they don't have is the relationship with him. So his relationship with the coaches, especially Coach Winston Delatibadier, who has been clutch for this Minnesota program, and hopefully they can keep him in tow for years and years and years to come, because he has been major, and you can see that in this edge room, which we just talked about on the show just 2 days ago. So why he decided, why go there when he has all of that and more here with the University of Minnesota? So I love to hear that reasoning. I love to hear him comfortable and confident in his decision. So it looks like he is here to stay and keep putting on for the city of, or for the state of Minnesota, for the city of Minneapolis, and for Dinkytown itself. Now, he also said, what I am looking forward to as a Gopher is just being developed and proving myself right. I told myself I want to be the best linebacker out of the U and outperform every linebacker that people claim are better than me just because I'm from Minnesota, and I'm going to continue to work all day, every day to do that. Man, I love the determination. I love the mindset. I love the grind. And I love that he has the drive to go out there and prove that it doesn't matter he's coming from Minnesota. It doesn't matter that he's staying home. He is going to ball, and he's going to put a name for himself here in Minnesota. I love the fire. I look forward to seeing him do it. So thank you, Emmanuel Karmo, for doubling down, tripling down, and we are excited to have you here at Minnesota. Now, the final thing that we're going to talk about on today's show is the Gophers women's basketball team, because their team is shaping up. They have one scholarship available if they want to fill it for the next season. Otherwise, this roster looks locked, loaded, and ready to go. So we're going to talk about the players that are coming in from the transfer portal, the players that left in the transfer portal, and finally, how I think maybe the minutes or rotation could shake out next season. That's what's coming up next. All right, Gophers fans, it's never too early to talk some women's hoops, and I love this Gophers women's basketball team. I love Dawn Plitzoway as the head coach and what she built in year one. Now, there were some ups and downs. There were some injuries to worry about. The injury to Mara Braun and Sophie Hart was extremely detrimental to the Gophers' high-end upside. I think if those two players had stayed healthy the whole season, this team would have went to the NCAA tournament. Now, others could doubt me there, but they made it to the WNIT. They made it all the way to the championship game, and unfortunately, they didn't pull off the championship, but they got a ton of extreme experience that could help take them even further next year. But let's talk about what this roster looks like for next year. Now, you've got all your starters back, which is key, and that is pertinent because there isn't a whole lot of change there, and they will play faster, more instinctive, and know what this coach is looking for, and to be able to help usher in the others that are coming through. Now, on top of that, you've got Kennedy Click, who was out with an injury all last year, but she was in those meeting rooms, in those practices, watching, taking it in, being able to take mental reps. On top of that, McKenna Johnson came in early enrolled, and ended up practicing with his team, even though she couldn't play last year. That's already a redshirt freshman and a true freshman coming in ready to run and grind and hit the ground running with those 5 starters. That's 7 locked in. You've got Maggie Zanano back. You've got Nehemiah Holloway back. Both of them key bench players last season. That's 9 scholarship players right off that bat that you have back ready to play in this system for another year. That's going to be impactful for Minnesota, but who are the players coming in from the transfer portal and how much impact can they have? They've got 4 players from the transfer portal, the first being Taylor Woodson, a transfer from Michigan. She initially played her high school ball here in Minnesota. And yes, if you look at the box score of her freshman year, you might be like, oh, wow, there isn't a ton of points scored there or anything like that. Nothing to shock you or wow you, but she was a true freshman who played in 32 games on a tournament team and was just under 10 minutes a game. So she could definitely step into a bigger role and has experience that this Minnesota team could definitely value. On top of that, in high school, that's where you can see the heavy upside. That's where she brings a ton to this team. She was ranked 59th in her class, a 4-star recruit. She was an all-state player, all conference honors, and averaged 18.7 points per game. So she has the scoring prowess. And on top of that, she has a relationship with the Maya Battle. They had played together and won a state championship together. Definitely not bad to have chemistry with one of the star players heading in. Now, on top of that, you've got 3 other transfers coming in. Annika Stewart comes in from Nebraska. She is a big player, 6'3", 6'4". She is a player who could come in off the bench for Sophie Hart. She has played in the conference, and she could play a bigger role here than she did at Nebraska. Another big that came in from the transfer portal, Jordan Brooks. Now, she transferred from a JUCO to CSU Bakersfield, and then she didn't get to play a whole lot there. I believe she had an injury, but she played 16 games, about 8 minutes per game. But at JUCO, she averaged 21.5 points per game, 9.7 rebounds per game, had 49 blocks, 32 steals across 22 games. So you see the upside, you see the talent, and she's 6'3", so she adds more post step. And that helps this Minnesota team a ton, because last year you had Sophie Hart, and then you had Ayanna Johnson, you had Nehemiah Holloway stepping into the bigs role. And Nehemiah Holloway is still going to be a bigs, but she's more of a bigs on the wing. She isn't the post player that this Minnesota team desperately needed once Sophie Hart went down. So Sophie Hart goes down. All of a sudden, you don't have a big that can play that true center position like Sophie did. And so your whole offense starts to change a little bit. So now you have Jordan Brooks. Now you have Annika Stewart, who can both step in when needed if foul trouble, when needed if injuries, and hopefully just to give Sophie Hart a breather here and there. That will definitely help Minnesota not have to change its whole offensive or defensive dynamic when Sophie Hart isn't able to be on the floor. Now, the final transfer to mention is Alexia Rose, but last but certainly not least, she's a transfer from UMass last year. She played 3 years at Eastern Carolina. Prior to that, she has NCAA tournament experience with Eastern Carolina. She's a defensive guard who keeps her turnover numbers down on the offensive side, so you love to see that. But her scoring breakthrough last year with UMass was definitely a nice thing, a sight to be seen. 11.4 points per game, 3.4 assists per game. She is a point guard type player. She started in 17 of the 20 games she played last year, and she could fill the departure left by Janae Sanders. Now, I think the biggest upside for Alexia Rose is the fact that her defensive prowess is going to get her on the field or on the court, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be strongly appreciated and liked by Coach Don Plitzwhite. And she has averaged about 1.5 steals per game over her last 3 seasons. So she can continue that, continue to get deflection, continue to put the pressure on ball. She is going to make a way onto the floor and play some critical minutes in the rotation for this Gophers team. So we've talked about who came in, but who left? You've got Ajak Madal, you've got McKinley Dalen, and you've got Ayanna Johnson, all of them transferred out, all of them being true freshmen last year. Now, the upside was big with Ayanna Johnson, with Ajak Madal especially, but you could see they weren't quite ready for consistent minutes night in and night out. Now, Ajak and Dalen were both Wayland commits, so it wasn't too shocking that with limited minutes and not necessarily coming for Coach P that they wanted to test out the transfer portal and potentially believe, especially with the core of this team being the youngest team in the Big Ten Conference last season. Now, Ayanna Johnson was a little bit more of a surprising one. She had been committed to Don at West Virginia. Then she flipped here when Don came here, and she had a role here. But she still left. Some rumored it was because she wanted to get closer to home, but it's hard to buy that when she ended up at Colorado when she's initially from Wisconsin. So overall, we'll see what happens. Ajak played, had 2.1 points per game, 1 rebound per game, had 4 games with 10 plus minutes. Best game was in the Big Ten tournament versus Michigan. Big, tall player with guard skills. We'll see how she comes into her own. Ayanna Johnson played 31 games last year, started 6, scored in double figures in 3 games. Season high was 19 points against Chicago State. Saw the potential, but there were still some learning mistakes and bumps along the way for sure. Dalen didn't get to play too much besides a couple of cleanup minutes here and there. All 3 ended up at recognizable programs. So Dalen and Ayanna are going to schools that made the tournament last year. McKinley Dalen is going to Gonzaga, and Ayanna Johnson is going to Colorado. Jack Matto is going to Dayton. I'll be very curious to see if Dalen and Ayanna can carve out role in minutes with their schools to see if they can play on a tournament level team like that. But Ajak, I feel, will get opportunities with the team that went 12-19 last season and could use that extra athleticism and size. So I think she'll get some minutes, but I'll be curious to see what happens with the other 2. Now, looking across these new transfers, I think the greatest impact of all these transfers is going to be Taylor Woodson, and she'll be the one who consistently breaks into the rotation, probably have a role each and every game, and could possibly find some starts or be the 6th woman of this team. Now, I think Alexia Rose is going to see close to 12 to 15 minutes a game, plays a role in the rotation. She showed she can be a scorer, but I think her role will be more on the defensive side of the ball and or in relief of Amaya Battle. So defense is a high priority for Coach P, so I definitely think she'll find her way on the floor. And then finally, I believe both Jordan Brooks and Annika Stewart will see time, but it could depend on the game plan. It could depend on injuries. It could depend on foul trouble. It could depend on needing wind. I think that's where they see the most of their minutes, and we'll see how that all works out. Maybe 10 minutes a game combined between the 2 of them, or one of them gets 10 minutes a game. The other one doesn't see too much time, but we'll see what happens. And then lastly, I think what you get from these transfer additions is Minnesota clearly prepped in case of injury to Sophie Hart. We saw how big of an impact that was for the Gophers women's basketball team last year, and they grabbed 2 people to fill that type of role and skill set just in case. But I am still slightly worried that if Mara Braun were to go down, who is one of the kind of only shot creators on this team, that we could be in for some trouble or in for some worries if that were to happen again. Now, maybe Taylor Woodson steps up more in that department. Maybe Amaya Battle continues to take strides that we saw at the end of last season. If that happens, then maybe you're not too concerned. But overall, hopefully Mara stays completely healthy. We have the full capacity of this roster, and we can watch this team make it to the NCAA tournament next year. Now, my way too early guess at rotations for next year is last year we saw Minnesota with 4 players with 32 minutes or more per game. I think that'll likely be lower. But that being said, I think all 5 starters will stay as is. Amaya, Mara, Grace, Mallory, and Sophie. I'm going to lock them as the starters. Things could change. Maybe someone gets outworked, but I think you're safer off betting that those 5 stay the starters. I think key reserves will be Nehemiah Holloway, who we saw in a key reserve role last year. And then I think Taylor Woodson and Alexia Rose are both going to have big time minutes for this team, 15, 20, who knows. But then I think there will be multiple players duking it out for minutes or rotation opportunities from Kennedy Click, McKenna Johnson, and Tori McKinney, all of them being freshmen, Kennedy being a redshirt freshman, and McKenna and Tori being true freshmen. Now, then I think the players who are more dependent on the game plan or starters, injuries, what have you, is Maggie Zanano, Annika Stewart, and Jordan Brooks, and then Bryn Senden, the walk-on the bench. Now, I think Coach P will be willing to go as shallow as an 8-person rotation. We saw a lot of that last year. She even kind of went 7 last year with the starters playing a massive amount of minutes, but we saw how that added up and ended up contributing to some injuries, which didn't play well for the Gophers in the long run. I think she's going to want to keep her starters healthy, keep her starters fresh, keep them getting wind here and there. So I think we'll work with an 8-person rotation at minimum, but I could see her going up to a 9 or 10-person rotation, having getting more players of her to fit her system into this program. So that being said, if my guess plays true, then I think that you're going to have those 3 freshmen, the redshirt and the 2 true freshmen I had talked about, potentially maybe one of the transfer bigs, all vying for those last 2 roles in 2024-25. That's kind of how I see things shaking out. I'll definitely keep you posted, and we'll keep talking about Gophers women's basketball along the offseason. But right now, for me, the most intriguing is McKenna Johnson and Kennedy Click. Both have high upside, but they haven't played Big Ten speed quite yet. So we'll see what happens there. But that's going to do it for us on today's show. I appreciate you for listening. We'll keep you posted. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the names that intrigue us on the official visit this weekend. Hopefully, we'll get some more commits headed this way that we'll dive into next week. I'll see you then. Row the boat, Sky, my Go Gophers, as always. And don't forget to hit subscribe.